You got plenty of time left on that?
Lots of time.
Okay. All right, we're going to start it out at the start, and that is if the power is off, here's what you got to do to turn things on. First thing to turn on the console, the control console, there is a rocker switch on the back here. Just feel around and you turn it on, and it will slowly come on. There is a rack up here which turns on your wireless microphones. There is a rack down here which turns on various other parts of the system. And
It's
there's
mostly video stuff in that.
yeah,
right?
mostly video stuff in that. And down underneath here there is another one which turns on the power amplifiers and the processor, and this takes quite a while to boot up. And until it finishes booting up, you can't use the system, so don't try to do things at the very last minute. But it takes a while, I mean a couple of minutes, it doesn't take a half hour or something like that. But it will take a while. So while that's booting up, let's talk about the design of the system in general. And this is just for general information, so you'll sort of understand how it's put together. The loudspeakers at the front, you probably already know about. There are two columnar shaped speakers to the sides of the organ grill cloth up front. Those are new. Those are interfaced with the speakers that you've had for quite a while, feeding the back part of the sanctuary. The relative adjustment between the front ones and the rear ones is all internal here. You don't have any control over it, nor should you have control over it. There are also speakers out in the hallway areas, as you've had in the past. It sounds a bit better now, but they're all the same. And there's also a feed from the system down to the fellowship hall, which we can go into eventually. Pastor Pete knows how to do that, I think, right?
We'll definitely go through all the motions.
Yeah, we'll go through the motions on that as well. Let's see. You think we're booted up yet?
I still see flashing down there.
Getting closer.
So will that light turn green when it's ready?
I believe so. I'm gonna see what the status says right now.
Guess we'll find out.
It just went green.
It just turned green.
It still says offline. It's doing initialization here. So very shortly after that turned green, you can see this display went from red to blue, meaning it's starting up for real. And then I think momentarily here we'll have
Now it's orange.
it's orange.
Digital audio really is just another type of computer when you get right down to it, so it has a lot of the peculiarities of anything that's in the digital world. It's good to keep on talking here. As far as inputs to the system go, you've got the same number of wireless microphones you've always had. You've got a different configuration of inputs in and around the stage area. We'll talk about that a little bit. There is a CD player. There's still a feed from the computer for audio playback, and all of that is controlled through this board right here.
This does say okay. Now I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but that does say okay.
Okay, so green is good.
Yeah.
And that third line down there is green.
Yeah, that third line down is giving you the status, and
radios.
it's black.
So now you know about how long it takes to boot up. All right. So all of the controls that you're going to be concerned with during a typical service are going to be on this board here, with one minor exception that we'll get into. The board has basically, if you look at the surface of the board, the controls over here are for your inputs. The controls here are for your outputs. And there are some buttons over here that do interesting things that we'll get into. Within the input section, there are different layers. Here you see 16 what we call faders or volume controls. And if we press this button here, we're looking at inputs 1 through 16, which is what it says. If we press this, we're looking at inputs 17 through 32. And you notice that some of these are already adjusted to a certain volume level. And when we switch between the layers, then that moves up because they're motorized faders. And that's one of the advantages of a digital board is all those settings can be saved. And we'll go through how to do that so that it's resettable. If somebody comes in here and does that, then all we need to do is to recall the memory and it will pop back up there. So we'll go through that. The third layer here is where some of the auxiliary inputs are. We don't have very much to do on this layer. Actually, I guess the only thing that's on that layer right now, we have Media Shout, and we have the PC audio, and we have CD playback, and we have your two hanging microphones that are set up to go only to recording, not to the loudspeakers. You probably already know that, right? If you try to amplify with them, all you get is feedback, right?
Right.
Okay, that's normal. And then the bottom layer here is bus masters. A bus is a system output. So bus master, these are the master volume settings for various outputs off the board. Normally, you won't have to do anything here. This is probably all preset. You may eventually change it depending on how your gain settings go, but for right now, let's just say that we're not going to mess with this. So, if we go back and try to figure out how does all this work, let's just take a microphone. Which one should I use? You may notice that these, what we call a scribble strip here, scribble as in pencil, that's an analog word, but we apply it to digital. These scribble strips are color-coded, and you can change the colors if you want to. Right now we've sort of chosen purple to indicate wireless and green wired. But you may elect to do something else. You might have a color, for instance, specifically for the instruments in the band. You might have a color for the vocalists, etc., etc. You can do whatever you want to there, and we'll show you how to do that as well. So if I just pick up a random microphone here, we'll hope the battery is charged, which is blue. If I look over here, I see that channel 27 also says wireless 6 blue. 6 just refers to the number of the receiver over here. It really doesn't mean anything except that it's got a label of 6 somewhere. But we know that it's the blue one because it says blue here. Right now we have a volume up, but the channel is muted. So very simply, if I want this to talk, I have to unmute it. That's basically turning it on. The main volume here has to be up, and it works. Surprise. Or maybe not. So if I turn that up, the volume goes up, and if I turn it down, the volume goes down. So that's sort of the basic thing that's going on here. Now each channel, what we're going to call the individual things that go into this board channels, the individual channel can be controlled in a variety of ways. That information shows up on this screen over here, and some of it also shows up with these knobs over here. How do we know which channel is being shown? Well, it's by selecting the channel here.
Let me get a close-up of that.
And that's an important distinction. Selecting a channel does not turn it on or turn it off. It simply says this up here pertains to that particular channel and not to anything else. Okay? So, if I'm talking on this, for instance, there are various functions up here. The most important ones are, number one, over here at the upper left corner of the console, there's a button here, a knob that says gain. That's another volume control, and I can control the loudness here. You can get it either plus or minus. So why do we have more than one volume control? Why do we have one here and one here? Well, if you're going to be an operator it's really easier if you can arrange your board so that all of your faders are about at the same level here. So you can do that even if you've got a lot more signal on one than another by monkeying around with this control here, so this is where you want it. Okay?
Is that like the red sensitivity button on the top of an analog board?
Yeah, it's this.
Yes.
It's this knob. It's the very top knob underneath.
It's also called an input gain control. Some people call it a trim pot in the analog world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same function that you normally see at the top of a channel strip on an analog board. Exactly the same, except again, this is in the digital world.
Yeah. Just trying to get people that, acclimated to understanding how this changes from a
I'm going
digital
to jump
board.
in real quick. It's worth pointing out that the channel meter here, and if, for example, you have this one selected, is going to show up here. This is what we call pre-fader, so it doesn't care where this is. So you can dial in your adjustment regardless of where your fader is. And this is more or less, if you're familiar on your analog board, when you hit the PFL, and this meter is now metering that channel, it's like that's happening on all those channels already without having to do the pre-fader listen. It's already kind of happening per channel.
Yeah, in point of fact, I've got the gain turned down all the way here, but you can still see that meter jumping up. And another purpose of this trim pot, if you will, or this gain adjustment up here, is to keep you from overloading the board so it starts distorting. And if your situation is such that somebody's going to be singing very loudly into this, ah! You notice it went pretty high up here, but it didn't go into the red. If it goes to the red, then this needs to be turned down so you won't have distortion. And that's the same whether it's a digital board or an analog board. That's just good mixing technique. But the gains are adjusted throughout the system to where if our master over here is at 0, which is 0 is not at the top, it's right here where it says 0. If your fader is here and your faders are somewhere around here, it's probably going to be okay if it's loud enough. We've tinkered with Al already, in other words. So, other functions up here. The gain is the most important one. The other thing which you may or may not find useful is the equalizer section or tone controls. Everybody that's ever operated a board knows about EQ or tone control or whatever. The system has been equalized permanently within the digital processor, so that what comes out is generally going to sound about right. The purpose of the equalizer is not to make it sound funny, but to compensate for something that is not quite bassy enough, or maybe the person's voice doesn't have enough sibilance, or maybe it's a little bit too hissy or whatnot. And if so, this is the EQ section. To utilize the EQ, you've got to turn it on, and there is a button there, and when it lights up EQ, this is now active. And then it's just like you would have on an analog board, where you can choose the frequency, and you can choose the width of the filter, and you can also choose the depth of the filter.
Can you explain what those are?
Sure.
For people that don't understand what that means.
Okay, frequency. One that says frequency, or frequency is whether it's whether it's bass or but tenor, alto, bass, soprano, basically, just whether it's high frequencies or low frequencies. If you look over here on the board, you can see exactly where you are in the frequency region for those people that understand that technology or that terminology. And you can you sort of see
On the display there,
There we go.
when you hit the home button, just some simple navigation stuff. When you're on the home page there, if you see there's different tabs, the home button has kind of a summary.
Right.
It's got a small view of the different processes per channel. If you push the cursor button over, you can page over to the EQ, and then now it's a much more detailed view of exactly what he's showing you now.
Yeah, easier to see on the camera for sure. So right now, see, I've played with it, and it might be interesting to see what it sounds like, but probably is not going to sound very good because I've put a huge peak out here, out sort of up in there, and I've cut down out some of the bass. So we could run the volume up, I guess. Let's see. Check, check, check. Guess what? It doesn't sound very good. Which goes to show you that you can have a really nice sounding system, but you, the operator, have the capacity here to make it sound absolutely awful. So we always say that if you're going to be a sound system operator, you should have a good ear and common sense. And if you don't have one of or both of those, then please go work the lights, not the sound. So, that's,
Everything's redundant in there, so you can grab the hard knobs like he was grabbing up there and choose the band that you want and choose the various parameters, or you can kind of drive it all directly from the screen and grab the knobs down there. They're both, it's all just what you're comfortable with. They both do the exact same things, and as you turn to one knob, you can see the values change on the screen. So it's your own comfort level of where you want to do these things. On the digital board, there's usually 2 places to do almost everything, so it can make it convenient and also confusing. So kind of take it as it comes.
yeah, but,
So-
just like an analog board or many analog boards, this has a 4-band EQ. You have high, high, mid, and this is frequency. Well, again, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, sort of top to bottom here, if you feel the need to do that. But as I said, I hope you won't do that a whole lot. If something doesn't sound right, if somebody's voice doesn't sound right, then okay, fine. But that's where your judgment comes in. And if you're not going to use the EQ, just don't click that in and you're safe.
So 12 o'clock high is flat, right? And
12
so if they go towards
On
counterclockwise,
the
they're
gain knob.
subtracting, and when they go
Yes.
forward, they're adding.
Yes, and when you're here dealing with the EQ, if you hit this view, then that will give you the view that
On the screen.
It jumps to that tab.
on the screen as well. So if you want to see what you're doing, just hit that view, and then when you're tired of looking at that, you can unhit it, and then it goes back to your normal screen here, whatever that may be. Okay, so enough about the EQ for right now, and this is duplicated for every single one of your inputs. It also exists for the outputs, but please don't use it on the outputs because, again, the permanent EQ takes care of that. Okay, so we handled the gain over here, and we handled the equalizer. There's also something called the low cut here. Your loudspeaker system has full range speakers. It also has subwoofers. Subwoofers are for instrumental purposes. They're not for vocal purposes. So you don't want the subwoofers turned on for your microphones, whether they're for the spoken word or whether they're even for music, unless you've got somebody with a real deep bass voice, Old Man River, that sort of thing. So since this is a vocal microphone, we should probably turn on the low cut, which basically just keeps the sound from going into the subwoofer, depending on where that low cut is operating. And usually for most vocal mics, that ought to be somewhere around 100 hertz, maybe a little bit higher than that for female voices. So we can sort of illustrate what happens if you misuse that. And we turn this up a bit more, and we'll take the low cut and we'll keep on running it up to where all of a sudden, guess what? I don't have any bite to my voice anymore. And that's because the frequency at which it's letting the sound come through the system has gotten higher and higher and higher. So I no longer have a baritone, I'm more of a thin voice person, somewhere around here, I'm not sure what. But as I move this back down, the voice is still natural. But if I take this completely out, and I get too close to the subwoofer, then the system might start to run. And you've probably encountered that sometimes in the past. So,
Yes.
Typically, you won't, when you have it for a vocal mic, you won't really even hear it come and go because there's just no content down there. But it just keeps rumble out, any garbage noise that would come through, it just kind of keeps it out. There's nothing present in your voice that's there.
It all-
leaves room for your organ sounds and your kick drum sounds and bass guitar sounds in that low area.
It also helps a bit to control pee-popping on your spoken word microphones. If whoever's talking has a tendency to be very percussive like that, having the low cut filter in will sometimes help control that percussive noise.
Yeah.
So before we leave today, we're going to set that on all the vocal microphones if we can just figure out what they are.
Sure.
My recommendation is usually have it on everything, and then you turn it off by exception. More than anything, it's pretty much on everything, and you turn it off on a handful of things that it's beneficial to let go.
Great.
through.
Until you're sure how your setup goes from week to week to week. Right. After you establish a routine, then it'll be just recall that scene and go with it. It'll get easier every week. Okay, so we've talked about the gain and the low cut and the EQ. We're not going to worry about the compressor, and we're not going to worry about the gate because you really don't need it in this system. For those that know what a compressor or a gate does and have the skill to use it, they're there. But please don't turn them on if you don't understand them.
In other words, don't turn them on.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Better not used than misused.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's see, where should we go from here, Jason?
I think you've gone through the majority. I maybe give them a little navigation through the screen or the home screen of what's on there, I don't know, maybe.
It's either there or go into the monitor circuits, into the outputs.
Yeah, that's not unreasonable. That's a good way to go.
Okay, so a bit of review here. Turn this off for just a second. A bit of review. These are inputs and these are outputs. Okay, so why do we have multiple outputs? It's because on this board we've got outputs going to your speakers. We've got outputs going to your 4 monitor channels. You've had 4 monitor channels in the past, is that right? Okay, you still have 4 monitor channels. And you've got outputs going to your recording circuits. And let's see, what else?
You've pretty much summarized it there.
That's
We really are
about right.
doing four monitor mixes, and then we're creating kind of a record mix that's going multiple places, not just record. It's going to your audio recorder, it's going to your video recorder, it's what we're sending to the radio. It's really the same mix, so that way you don't have to generate a unique mix because it's not practical. But right now that's on a bus on 11 and 12.
Yeah. So this is a little bit squirrely, but after you learn it, it's, oh yeah, that makes sense, it's that kind of thing. So as is the case here, we have 4 different layers here. The top layer is what we call group outputs. On an analog board, it would be group output. On a digital board, it would be called a DCA for digital controlled amplifier. I'll go ahead and show that just because it's in order here. It's an option that if you find useful, fine. If it confuses you, don't use it. A group output is a way of combining inputs here under one control to raise and lower. So let's just say for a second that you wanted such a control for all of your vocal wireless microphones, of which there are 8 on this board. I could identify any one of these group outputs here. I can hold down select like so, and then I can hit select on everything I want to be in that group like so. After I do that now, these volumes are already set. If I want to raise or lower these volumes, I can do them all at once with this control. You don't have any ability to set that volume differently, the relative volumes, than you already had them set. So it's just sort of an extra gain stage. And I believe that it works that if you have this up to 0, that's sort of like this wasn't in the circuit. But if you wanted to have it so that you could raise your vocals or lower your vocals, that's one way you could do it. And you could then, and you can title that if you're going to do that. And then you could do the same thing, for instance, for your band. You do the same thing for the bell choir, whatever. It's a fairly straightforward way to do it, but that may confuse some people, and if so, then please don't use it. Or if it's set and usable, just leave it up to normal position and people just ignore it. Either one of those is fine. So I'm going to take those out right now. If I change my mind, I just do the same thing in reverse. I hold this down and make it so that those select lights turn out, and this is no longer doing anything whatsoever. So that's just the same 8 times. Okay, so that's the top layer. The next layer down is bus 1 through 8, which in the vernacular means outputs number 1 through 8. And on the scribble strip here, those are labeled. The first one is labeled monitor A. We know what that is. Monitor B, monitor C, monitor D. Mixed bus.
That's just the generic default title.
Yeah. And mixed bus, mixed bus, mixed bus, mixed bus. So you really probably shouldn't mess with these, because when you get to sending stuff over your monitor speakers, just assume that this master volume, if you will, is in the right place. And we're going to show you how to adjust the individual volumes going to those mixed buses. Okay? So let's assume for a second that we're working with monitor A. Once again, I have to select monitor A. Okay, so how do I do this? Let's see. Okay, so I've selected monitor A. You notice that monitor A is muted right now, so nothing would come out. If I run to use it, I've got to unmute it. So what's going into monitor A? Right here, there's a button called fader flip. If I press that, then this transforms into a board that we call sends on fader, which is a weird term, which basically says what is the volume setting of each one of these channels going to monitor A. And as you can see here right now, there is one thing going to monitor A, which, surprise, is the blue microphone, which is I've been talking, because we were using that for testing. So if I wanted all of the vocals going into monitor A, which I might very well, what would I do? After pressing this fader flip, I would raise all the gains here, and then I could either say, okay, either they have enough monitor sound or they don't, and I could adjust it here, or I could even adjust the master here. Okay? And the same goes for B and C and D. Now, a word about philosophy of running monitors. One of the real pitfalls in any live sound application, especially churches, is getting the monitors too loud. So when people up on stage request monitor sound, what you do is you get whatever mix you're going in there, and you increase the volume until one of two things happens. One is they say that's loud enough. The other is you start hearing the difference out here in what you get out of the main speakers. And the first one that happens, you stop. Because if you get it to where it's coloring the sound out here, that's going to be destructive to the people that are here to hear the performance rather than the performers. And that's true in any live scenario.
You grasp the whole Sons on Fader thing.
Yeah.
If here's an analog board, if it helps at all, when you're not on Sons on Fader, the faders are the faders and the master is the master. When you go to Sons on Fader, now it's as if all those faders are this aux row knobs, and then when you have the bus master, that's the aux master for that channel. So really, it's just kind of to relate it to this board, it's just substituting the faders for that row of knobs. That's all it is.
So that is true for buses 1 through 8. It's also true for buses 9 through 16. And buses 11 and 12 here are the feeds to your recorder. So once again, the master volumes are already up, So if we wanted to know what is going to our recorder, we can select that channel, and we're still in a fader flip. So all of these channels right here are already going to your recorder, which is also true of your inputs 1 through 16. So if there's something you don't want going to your recorder, you've got that selected, you're in fader flip, whatever that is you don't want to record, maybe somebody's got a bad voice, you turn that down and then it don't go to the recorder. You don't have any bad voices, right? That's fine. So, okay?
If I can make a quick point here.
Yeah.
Too. When you are descending to a bus, a mixed bus, it's what's called post fader. So it is dependent, this level that we're sending to the monitor is dependent on the level that we're sending it to the front of house to begin with. So if I have it pulled down to front of house, you won't hear it up there unless we go through and make selections to defeat that and change that. But by default, we don't want to do that. We want to keep it post fader so that if you need to fade somebody out, you're fading them out everywhere. And that way you're not creating multiple mixes, because if you fade out the master here, you still have tons of stage volume because all the monitors are still blasting. So by default, we're going to have everything be post fader. So that means that with the fader flip off, when we're on the main layer here, you need to have a channel up to hear it, to be able to go to fader flip and then do something. If you notice on the record bus, I have everything even across the board. Since it's post fader, unless we modify something, this is essentially the same mix as the left-right bus, as the main bus. We can then make exceptions and say, like Richard mentioned, we don't want that. We want a little more of these going to the recorder, and now we go back to the front of house mix, and you can more or less set it and forget it. You make your tweaks, you make your adjustments, and then you're going to just mix the front of house. So it can kind of take. You do need to give it attention, but it won't require constant attention because it's more of an adjustment on the main mix from the main mix.
So when you say recorder, is it the same mix now for going to our recorder, to the radio, to the
Yes.
recording? So it's all one mix, so that's how they adjust. If they adjust one, they're adjusting everything.
Exactly. And to that point, it's a very good idea, because we're hitting all of these devices, to not change the master on the board. Because you're going to need to tweak your input level for your recorder here, and that recorder is going to have its own little thing. And as soon as you change it, you've kind of changed these balances. So in a perfect world, if something needs to change, you'll change it at those dedicated devices.
If it turns out that your recording equipment, it just says, I've got too much noise, I need a little bit more signal, then you can play with the master control and resync the scene.
Okay.
But just understanding that you are affecting everything that is listening to the
Yeah.
record bus when you do that. So you just tread lightly when you adjust that.
Yeah.
You know.
Another thing having to do with the recording buses, we've talked about the two hanging microphones over the choir. They're used for recording only. Those, once again, are on the third layer here, and they are
They're the ones
they're labeled right here.
Yeah.
AUX 5 and AUX 6.
Yeah.
And they say hanging microphone, and you'll notice that we're not looking at sends on fader right now. We're looking at what actually comes through the house, and they're turns down.
Now they do need to be turned up if we're going to hear them, because they're post fader.
But
Go ahead.
oh yeah. So indeed we ought to run those up.
But
There's another adjustment that's been made specific to those microphones. So if I hit select, you see the lower right there? It says LR. It's been turned off from even going to the main left right
Okay.
bus.
Yes.
So we're turning the fader up, but we're literally turning off the send to actually make it to the master fader. This is really the only channel you need to do this with, unless, for example, your choir stick mics have a similar kind of issue of feedback and things like that. But because we don't want those to go in there, we've literally completely cut them out all the way. But they do still need to be up because the sends
Unless we
are
change those to
post fader.
pre-fader.
We could change those to pre-fader, and we can do that on a per channel basis.
Maybe we'll do that.
that might not be a bad
we'll
idea.
We'll make
Yeah.
that so you can leave these down.
Yeah.
But if I go to, for instance, your feed going to the recorder, and I select that and do my fader flip again, those microphones are up.
Okay.
Okay, there's nothing on the bottom one here that you need to be concerned with, so we're gonna skip that. Show you a gadget here, mute groups. You got mute groups on analog consoles too sometimes, right? Okay. Well, here you have 6 mute groups. So in the same way that you could have up to 8 subgroups over here, you can also have up to 6 mute groups. So if rather than just controlling the volume of particular groups of microphones, if you want to be able to turn them on and off quickly, you could do that with your subgroups, but you can also do it by programming in a mute group. And if I go through here, somewhere here, I don't think I've got any program right there. Okay, so let's program. If I want to program a mute group, I go up here to where it says mute group on this menu, which is right next to the screen. Mute group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all this matches up. So I can now hold down this 1, I think this is right, and I can now, oh look, those 3 are already selected. I'm going to go ahead and select 3 more as well. So those are all on mute group number 1 now. If I press that button, all 6 of those are now muted. And if I take this out of mute group, I believe, yes, now it's on this button here. So if, for instance, you elect to have a mute group for maybe all the musicians or maybe the band, you can have them all on mute group 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, whatever. You can put a label here saying mute band, and when it's time for the band not to be live, you don't have to turn all these things down. You just press that button and it's muted. And it says right here that they're muted. Okay? Very handy.
I think if you were to even do something like that, it will still, it kind of change, you know what I mean? It brings everything to the same state of mute and not mute. Kind of.
Yeah, and that takes place also. Oh, I didn't add it. Sorry. Let's see. Mute group. Hold that in and add that one. I'll take that out. So that's been added to the mute group. So it's very easy to do once you get used to doing it. But guess what? Once you're set up, then you probably are not going to have to worry very much about it. It's just a tool that you use rather than one that you have to think about a whole lot.
I'll point one thing out. He's kind of gone over the DCAs and the mute groups. They have a similar kind of function, a similar way that you assign it. Mute groups, you can see exactly what's happening. So when you've done a mute group, you see everything mute, you see it on mute, as it toggles. The caveat I would say with the DCAs is you don't have any real feedback. When I say feedback, you don't visually see anything changing. So when you get into using the DCAs, it can be, in my mind, with this particular board, the way it's implemented, it's a little dangerous because you don't really know. This fader looks like it's up. It says it's unmuted. Why don't I have sound? It's because it's assigned to a DCA that's been pulled all the way down. Other mixers, often because there's motorized faders, it literally, as you move that DCA, it moves all the other faders proportionately. This doesn't have those kinds of feedback. It doesn't really show you that. So just knowing that, put that in your back pocket if you're gonna do it, just because there's some things happening that you don't see, and that's where it becomes a little confusing.
As an illustration of that, I just put this blue microphone on the DCA, and once again I did that by holding select here and hitting select on the blue microphone. And right now I have this volume down, and even though I have this up and the channel is on, I'm getting nothing out of the speakers. Why is that? Because I don't have this volume up here. So this could be one microphone, it could be 20 microphones that I'm controlling them all at one time. But if I forget that that's up and it gets pulled down, then all of a sudden I'm dead.
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm going to undo that real quickly.
And it's grabbing all the channels at their current relative levels, and the DCA is kind of like, what percentage of your level are we applying?
But
You know what I mean? So
But you can still wiggle.
yeah, it doesn't
controls.
defeat that. But if you have a smiley face of faders and you bring your VCA down, it's maintaining that, but it's pulling them all down. It's pushing them all up proportionally.
It's
You know what I
one-
mean?
it's
And you
one-
might jack one up, and it's going to do that. You know what I mean? So
It's one of the advantages and challenges of digital board is that there's always more than one way to do things. And so you play with it. And if you've got the mindset to play with it and come up with a logical conclusion, then you're well suited to this. If you're more cautious, then stick to the basics and don't play.
Now, last Sunday, we ran into a situation where we were broadcasting radio silence for 4 minutes. And we had the faders up. We thought we were sending it out on, at that time, I think it was 8 or 9, or 1 and, maybe it was 1 and 2 that was it. So it took us a little bit, and then what we realized was when you look at the left and right speakers, they were pulled down. The 1 and 2 were pulled down on there, and it wasn't until we pushed them back up. So I'm not sure how it was routed last week,
Well,
but
again,
I'm hopeful that that's not going to be an
Since
issue
it's
now.
post fader, if your speakers were turned off, if your individual gains were turned off going to the speakers, then they're turned off going everywhere, because it is post fader again. Your faders have to be up, and the sound has to be coming through the speakers in order for it also to go to recording.
they'd be on the 11-12 pair. The 11,
They're on
12,
11 and
the
12
11-12
now.
mix bus
Right.
pair is what shows up to the radio and the recording. So
So we know that if we have 11 and 12 up and we're getting
yeah, in fact,
sound to the recorder, it's also going to the radio.
if you see, metering here, there's that's kind of your level 1. You look right at the mixer and see that you've got it going out there. You have your metering on, glance off to your right, if you have metering there. I mean, you're taking a little bit on faith that everything else is working, but it's
Right.
all off the common feed, so.
But that's a helpful thing for us in troubleshooting, to know that it's at least going out, and now we can eliminate everything from the front of the house to here, and then it'll be something else.
But you know what? That's also a good segue into scenes, because how do you reset the board? How do you get the same thing that you had last Sunday? Well, the answer is that you save it and you recall it. And that's relatively easy on this board, but again, it's useful to know how to do it.
Yeah.
In sort of geek speak rather than useful speak, they call it show control. What you're doing here is a religious service, but it's also a show, so you're controlling the show. So the show control is where you can store and recall scenes, we call them there. A scene is just a snapshot of the way the board is configured, everything on the board. And you can save it. You can save almost as many of them as you might want to, and then you can recall them. And when you recall them, then you're exactly back where you were when that was saved. So after you're set up to the point where you know what the settings are for your individual services, plus or minus a couple of musicians or whatever, then you recall that scene. And if you have extra musicians, you turn them up. If you don't have some, you can turn down their mics, whatever. But you still have that scene that you can recall. So our recommendation is that at least at the outset, you establish the pattern where when you turn on the system or when you come in for service, you go ahead and unless something special has been saved, you recall your standard scene for that service. And then you know you're starting out at the same place every week. And after you've done this a while and you're accustomed to it, it'll be like second nature and make things a whole lot simpler. So, how do you do that? Okay, show control. Probably the easiest way to do it is that there's a button here that says View. If you hit View, then up on the screen here pops a list of your scenes. And right now we have two scenes here. We have TSECO, which is,
That's my company's.
that's
initials.
Tar and Sound. Who's your
We're
sound
gonna wipe that out
contractor?
before we're all done. We'll put new.
Yeah,
you know,
that was sort of a test in there. It
Yeah.
will say something. And then the one after it says start. Okay. You can name it what you want to, but we said start. So, well, let's see. I've changed a couple of things, but that's all right. We're going to go back and change a couple of things anyway. But let's just say, okay, guess what? Somebody came in here and messed things up. All right, so what do I want to do here? If I look at this and I go down at the bottom, right here it says scene 2, or I can turn this knob and I can select other scenes, but I'm going to select scene 2 since that says start. And that label there says go. So what happens if I press go? It says, are you sure? Do you really want to raise that scene? There's this, these cursors here. If I change my mind, I can cancel. If I say, yes, I want to recall that scene, I can press that. Oh look, I'm back to where I was.
It's good that it slows you down and confirms, because if you were sitting here for mixing for 20 minutes and you hit that, there's no undo. And so it's just a caveat is all.
So right now, this scene has all of your vocal wireless microphones muted. Let's say that you change your mind and you don't want them muted when the system first comes up. And maybe because you've got different singers, it's like that. What can I do? I can go here and I can move down to a vacant scene here. This right here says save. Okay, I can do this. Save. It's going to assume I want to call it start, but I can, I'm just going to, this is how you name things. It's sort of cumbersome, but basically you play around with these knobs till you get the name in there that you want. You can also add notes, like you can say this, you can put the date that it was stored, for instance, or maybe it's a particular configuration for Easter, or pick a note, or you can do it in the scene name as well. And after you do that, then you said, okay,
Click on the one in the right.
save. Look at that. Okay, save. I can do this, right? You just got to follow the instructions. Save, and I saved it. If I wanted to save it again, now since there's something in scene 3, it would say save it to number 3. If I change something though, and I say save, now since I've changed something, it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to override it? Yes, I am. And once again, since I'm sure, I'll go to the right here. And there we are. So, I can go back to scene 2, which is my start scene right now, and I can recall that. Or I can go to scene 3, which I just saved, go, yes, okay. So you can do that as many times as you want, because there is a total of 99 scenes.
Then they can be moved to a USB, you can shove them in and out, all those things, so you'll probably never exhaust it, but that's,
Yeah.
they're all there.
So that's how you do scenes. There are some ways to do it over here where you can step through scenes. If this were a theater and you were doing a musical and you had 75 scenes, then you set it up to where you could step through them sequentially with these buttons over here, but that's not what we're about, so this is probably the better way to do it. It involves more thought, which is always good. And once again, to get out of that menu, just unclick view, and there you are, sort of back to where you were. So once again, hit view, and on start, I want to go, yes, and there I am back to where I started out with these muted and these all straight across. So once you get a setup that you like, you save it and you use it until it's necessary to change it again.
And then say you're going to rehearse for your Christmas presentation, I would recall your basic setup store it to the next one, and then you're going to tweak it and add all this other stuff, and then you have a special one. But the liturgical mics haven't changed, your choir mics haven't changed. You know, most of it's going to be consistent. You just have new exceptions and new adjustments on, you know, on your non-basic stuff. So always good to kind of build off of, because it's also going to have a lot of time that you spent tweaking the pulpit mic is all now accumulated time built into your main presets and that kind of thing.
Yeah, while you're learning the board, it's a lot of concentrated thought to get it right. But after you've got it set up, it just becomes second nature, and it's just week after week you do the same thing. It's harder if you have somebody that only comes in once a month.
Which is
sort of
what we
FYI.
have for a few of them, yeah.
I mean, if anything, the biggest catch on a digital board is knowing where you are. The fact that I'm thinking about channel 17, but this is what's selected. My mind, I'm thinking about, I need to turn 17 up. Well, I need to make sure that is selected, and I can do this. Knowing where you are is key. Once you do, then you can kind of grasp this, but it's easy to kind of forget or not know what layer you're on. And fortunately, with all the labeling, how clear all this stuff is, this board does help alleviate that confusion. But it's really easy to just have your mind set on this channel, but it's not selected. So
Because
it's just keeping track
what my
of it.
mind always says is, okay, I'm working on this channel, so I can do something up here. Oh, well, I don't even have it selected. I'm doing something else that I didn't expect to do.
Yeah, you're changing
So
a
how-
channel a different layer.
So how do I undo that? And that is precisely why it's good to start out with your initial recall, because you always know where you start out.
Yeah,
Okay.
good point.
Were you going to mention applying those presets over here?
Well,
Or come
yeah,
back to that?
yeah, no, I can do that. We'll pull those down again. This may turn out to be useful for you, because you see over here, all these buttons here, well, they can be programmed to do different things. And if I go over here and go to option C, these 8 buttons have different functions, and you can have 3 sets of functions, basically. But I've got it programmed right now to where if I'm on C, and if I touch 5 here, oh, it says load scene, number 2, yes. So I didn't have to go through the menu. I could just hit that.
It's a shortcut.
Yeah.
It's a shortcut to recalling specifically scene 2. And in the same way this is programmed for that button under C to recall scene 2, 8 times 3 is 24. You can program 24 different functions, including recall of however many scenes you want to do. And if you like, I'll run through how you do that.
But that's just a very powerful thing for your most basic operators who can come in and hit that button, confirm, and then they don't have to have, they have to know the least amount of things to get up and running, and then it's just make things loud and quiet, you know, turn mutes on and off and make things loud and quiet. They don't have to know any of the other things, not even how to navigate to the scene recall or anything like that. It's just, do you know where that one button is and how to confirm it, and then you know you can kind of get there.
As is fairly common on this board, if you want to do something that's associated with a group of controls like this, and that's true over here as well, if you want to see what's happening up here, there's a view button. So if I hit view here, there's set A, set B, and set C for these different buttons, and that's where you can set what they actually do.
I think if you tab over, I think is what you need to do.
Yeah.
Use the cursor.
There's set A, set B, and set C. And by using these, what you'll see is encoder number 1. Hello. This is encoder number 5.
So you want to scroll down the buttons. You care about the buttons for the recall stuff.
Yeah. That's right. Button 5. These are buttons. Encoders are these things here. Button number 5 under C is on scene recall number 2. If I wanted to program a different button, let's say button 6, to recall, scene recall, assign, number 3, assign, voila. Now this says scene start, and this scene start DDDC, which is what I, just for fun, names the next one. So now I've done that, and I can, load scene, yes. Same thing I got by going through the menu here. So you can set it up to do as many things as you want to. That being said, this is sort of out here where people can use it, or they can press it by mistake. And if you've made a whole lot of changes on here, and it says, oh, I think I'll recall the original scene. Oops, I didn't save what I'd just done. Then you can do some work that way. So everything has a consequence, including these things, which are conveniences, if you will.
Fortunately, it slows you
Shortcuts.
down enough. You have to do that confirmation, so it's not a, oh, I rested my hand and all of a sudden I just reset the entire board in the middle of the show.
Yeah. So, I sort of think probably you want to start off with your wireless vocal mics hot rather than muted. I don't know. You got a preference?
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. Because they aren't going to turn on the vocal mics till they're ready to sing anyway. I'm presuming.
Yeah, it would be good to have them all programmed to be hot.
Yeah,
To start.
and we can spend some time talking about how it ought to be set up for you sort of to get going. We make assumptions, but sometimes our assumptions don't match up with the way you want to run things. I think, and indeed, you may find it useful to have more than one scene programmed, so that, let's say that you've got somebody coming in, that you're a little light on operators this week, and all you really want to do is turn on your main scene, then that ought to be a scene where everything is already live, that they don't even have to find the mute buttons. That you can have service and people will hear what's going on, even if it's not perfect. That there will be sound going to the recording, et cetera, et
Yes.
cetera. And then if it's a qualified operator, it probably doesn't matter too much because that operator is probably going to construct a scene that they like anyway. But again, it's just a whole bunch of tools, and you pick the ones that are most appropriate for your operating situation, even for a particular operator.
I-
70 volt.
The 70 volt feed, good point.
70 volt. Okay, your speaker's out in the hallway.
Yes.
He has configured the board so that where it says monitor here, this rotary control is the loudness of those speakers.
Hold on a second, let me get a close-up of that.
Yeah, it says monitor up here.
Oh, okay.
We could put a label on that, whatever makes the most sense to you,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call that whole feed, hallway feed or nursery or whatever single label we can put on there. There will be a little bit of a small learning curve that you'll need to apply to basically by ducking your head out in the hallway and having a good concept of how loud, if it's this loud here, how is it loud everywhere else. And then you'll probably settle in on finding where that spot is on the knob where you want it to be, and then maybe marking it somehow. That way you can kind of rely on it. But it gives you the freedom to have practice in here and turn it down, not hear it out there. I do believe it is post fader, so you can't have it just going out there. It's again, it's like a monitor send. It's you have to have the mains up to hear it out there. So it's a post fader send. So as long as you got that.
And they'll hear the same thing that's mixed coming over the main speakers.
Exactly.
But when we're having a rehearsal in here, we can turn that down.
You
Turn
got
that
it.
down.
You got it.
Yeah.
Does that go just out in this hallway, or is that like out there?
All the
It's,
seven.
yeah, everywhere you have a hallway speaker. I haven't traveled everywhere, but everywhere outside of this room, if there's a speaker, that's basically what it's.
That part of the system is the same as it was before.
Yeah, exactly. So that should be relatively balanced. So like I said, in the short term, I would just kind of calibrate your ear to understand if it's about so loud out in this hallway, you know how loud it is everywhere else, and then you'll be able to find what's appropriate and then you'll stop having to think about it very much after that.
Okay, would you like to explain how the sound's getting downstairs?
Sure. So it's
Go for
the same
Record feed. So everything we're sending to the recorder, we're going to send to the other room. So if I want to look at the master, it's this feed left and right, which again, we want to leave the master at unity. If I do my fader flip and I go to this, you can see everything is set. I got it set at -10. That gives us a little extra room to boost, a little room to cut, and you can rebalance as you want to, but everything is pretty much straight across the board. We can ignore these. I've got this boosted a little bit, but we can keep those down there. And so basically this is the record mix. It's the radio feed, it's the feed to the fellowship hall. The rest of it is kind of how we pick it up over there. We can kind of go through that when we go over there. But as long as you're creating your record mix, you've at the same time you've created your radio feed and your fellowship hall feed. So it's really all the same effort, all the same mix. We have dedicated physical outputs on here that are unique to all these places. So your video recorder, your audio recorder, the radio, the fellowship hall, they all exist on their own actual connections. However, the mixer can be set up so that we determine what mix is sent to those physical outputs. So there's this patching that occurs. I currently have it patched so that this 11 and 12 stereo mix is going to 4 different pair of outputs. Again, video record, audio record, radio, and fellowship hall. So they're on physical outputs. That means that at some point in time in the future, if you determine that these things need to be separate, it can all be done, and you can kind of break this down to multiple mixes. Obviously, it seemed to make most sense to start out with one, just distribute it then. The one caveat is that one adjustment adjusts all these different outputs. Maybe down the road you might find a need to have unique dedicated outputs. It also means you have to create unique mixes. So there's give and take to go with that. But that's how the feed goes over to the fellowship hall. Is this feed left right mix.
One detail on the 2 hanging microphones, which again just go to the recorder. Right now they're going through this temporary submixer over here. That's all that's left plugged in there. Those will not go through the submixer after he puts in a little preamplifier. The function of it is going to stay the same on this board. Just if somebody's wondering what the heck is this thing doing over here right now, it's temporary. Look at it that way.
It's going to serve a similar function, but it's going to be out of sight, out of mind. We'll have adjustments set to it. One thing that's worth pointing out here, and it's not a big deal, the inputs 1 through 32 all have kind of all of these processes available. They're all in there. When we get down to the auxes, they're doing almost all of the same things. But if you look at this screen here, I'm on aux 1. You see it has an in, it has an EQ, it has an out. If I go here, it has an in, it has a gate, it has dynamics, it has a high pass filter in here. It has a couple of other things. However, these auxes have everything you'll need in it, which is basically an EQ. You have a level and you have an EQ. It doesn't have a high pass filter. We'll have that applied on the preamp, that kind of a thing. So these are basically not terribly different than these, or slimmed down a little bit as far as the features, but they still retain all the features you would need for one-line level inputs that we have. But I think for the most part, your hanging mics will be a set and forget kind of thing. You'll find the level that's appropriate, and then you won't touch it.
And a final word about playing. If somebody wants to learn this board and really do it to the best, they ought to look at it as sort of a playtime experience in a way, because you can play with this board and you can see what the different controls do. Don't be afraid of screwing things up, because you can always recall the first memory and start over.
I would say they're more sophisticated than an analog board, but they're actually easier to use to some extent, because I just bailed myself out by recalling that preset. So it's liberating in that way, that allows you to experiment, it allows you to kind of take some risks, because you always have a fallback. There's nothing that you've done that you can't say, how did I get here and how do I get back? You can take a step back and get back. So you kind of have the benefit.
When you turn off this board, we talked about this briefly when we turned on the system. You don't necessarily have to turn it off. It's not going to hurt anything to leave it going, if you will. If you want to turn it off, that's fine too. and you might very well want to turn off at least the console so that people don't come in when they're not supposed to be playing with it and making strange noises and whatnot. To do that, you're supposed to boot it down rather than just turn it off, but we don't think it's going to be a serious, we don't think it's going to damage things if you just turn it off. Remember, the rocker switch is on the back, but before doing the rocker switch, it's best to go to the setup menu, global, and down here it says shut down. You press that, and it says you can now safely switch the console off, or if you change your mind, you can press home and keep going.
I'm kind of assuming that it's kind of committing the last things to internal memory and saying, okay, you're not going to lose whatever that last EQ adjustment you just made. Because normally what happens with this kind of board is when you shut it off and you turn it back on, it comes back to exactly the way that you had left it. So I think they're just making sure that whatever last.
Just look at it as a computer where you're supposed to turn it off by going to the shutdown menu rather than just unplugging it.
So where is that thing again? I didn't zoom in.
It's a setup.
Setup button here. And the first tab is global, so as soon as you hit it, it'll be the first thing that you see. So it's
Okay.
in this lower left corner here.
There it is. All right.
On all of these pages, almost any function that I go to, you see these various tabs. The cursor here will tab through all of those. So often when you go to something, there's a lot more than what you initially see there. So setup, even if I left set it up on network, if I go to home, if I go back to setup, it's still there on network, so we'll want to go over there.
And there is about 130 or 160 page manual, which is online, that you can download onto your pad or your computer and have that for bedtime reading or sitting here next to the console when you forget how to do something.
Usually my experience is that I'll show people a digital mixer, then you use it, you play with it, and then the gears start turning. And then you think, oh, wait, I want to do this, and then it's a good time to go look at that. There's YouTube videos on tasks, on specific, I want to do this function, and then something kind of walk you through that. And by all means, I think you'll learn a lot just by not being under pressure and just pushing buttons and playing with it and poking around. You know what I mean? At some point, you can fall back to the YouTube videos and help and the manual, and you can call us. I definitely recommend educating yourself because you'll get the most out of it. And honestly, I'm going to be looking at the manual to figure out how to do this stuff. So you'll benefit the most by kind of going through that process. But if you get stumped, by all means, we'll help you out.
Now, a plug to the people that are still in school that like to work with computers and various things like this. Digital boards tend to be very similar in the way that the signal flow and the controls work. And this is a currently designed digital board. And if you learn this, then that gives you a leg up to doing something like that at the next stage in your life, whatever that may be. It might be running a board at an amusement park. It might be running a board in a theater at college, whatever. But you've got that skill set already. You've got that background that makes the next step so much easier. And if you like doing it, it can be a heck of a lot of fun.
Any questions? Anything that we did not hit upon or that we kind of glossed over, went through too quickly?
No, I think I'm good.
Good. We didn't, I don't know what you did when I was at lunch, but we didn't kind of tweak things, dial them in. Podium mic, the wireless mics and things like that. Channels have been juggled since you used it last, so I would kind of walk into this as if I've screwed everything up, and you kind of need to give some little detail attention to most things. I don't think I really did anything on your first layer here, so the guitar, stuff like that I don't think I messed with those at all, but mostly on this second layer, the pulpit, the lectern, the choir mics, all those wireless mics.
It would be a real good idea to get the pastoral staff in here to try out their microphones and set levels on them before they say their first words on Sunday. Real good idea. And if the musicians are rehearsing, then get here for rehearsal and do it as well. If they've already rehearsed for this week, then it's all right. It'll just be an adventure Sunday.
Well, he will be running the second service, which is where the instruments will be. So.
Cool.
How's your performers vocally? Are they loud, dynamic? Do you have to coach them a lot to kind of sing out and forward, or
How would you assess it generally?
First service, I would say they're a little more timid. And especially, it's that dynamic as once they hear themselves in the speakers, they think they're too loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they back away from the mic, and
Sure.
then you got that
Chase them
effect
off.
going on, yeah.
As a performer, you've probably been through this many times, but when you have a competent sound system and a competent sound system operator, your job as a performer is to get up there and sing and let the control and the responsibility for the loudness and everything else fall to the person at the back here.
Yeah.
Because if you have an amplified musical program, that's the way it must be, because you can't have two people in control,
Right.
because there'll always be counter purposes. Because all the performer knows is what it sounds like on stage, and all this person knows back here is what it sounds like here.
Yeah.
And who's better placed to control what the people hear? It's all logical when you think about it, but that's hard for a lot of people that are not professional performers in particular to sort of wrap their heads around. They need to trust whoever's back here.
Right.
Partly why I asked is just to kind of curious how dynamic your singers are. For example, is anyone who's gonna just start belting like sings a certain tone, then all of a sudden they stop it up and they're 4 times as loud? If you know what I mean, do you really have to chase people around a whole lot, or or is it more really trying to get them to that point and they're not there themselves?
We have both ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
But yeah, we do have some that when you look at the board, it looks like they're almost shut down.
Yeah, I got you.
Because they project really, really well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That-
The less the
which is
system has
nice.
to work, the better. You know
That's,
what I mean?
Yeah.
that's the unspoken part of the power that this person back here has is if somebody's not a very good singer, well, guess what? We can handle that back here. We have the power.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention, kind of coming back around to the gain adjustment and the preamp here, kind of just a general sound check approach to determining what the appropriate level here is and why you want to do it that way is so on this blue microphone here, 1, 2, 3, 4.
You're muted.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm metering here. What I want to do is I have very loud singer on the blue mic, and I have very quiet singer on the red mic. What I really want to do is I want to shoot for, let's say, -9 for everybody. So the loud person who's belting really loud doesn't need much help, so they're going to have the gain turned down a little bit, but we're still trying to achieve -9. The really quiet singer needs just to turn this up a whole lot to get it to there. If we do that for both of them, then their faders are in the same relative spot, and we don't run out of fader position, and you can at a glance see that they're about where they are. You don't need to chase people's volume with the trim knob, but as far as doing an initial sound check, you just want to have a target of, whatever in this ballpark, and if you can get everybody in there. If you have people who are going to go from, oh, this is how I normally sing, and then all of a sudden I'm going to sing really loud, you have to be aware of that, because it's really the peak that we're most worried about. You don't want it to clip and distort, you'll hear that. And most anything else we can kind of compensate for. It gets less convenient, it's less ideal, but the worst thing you're going to do is to distort it. So you always want to err on the side of a little too quiet if you need to. But as far as trying to target these things, if you can get everybody coming in at about the same level, achieving that with this knob, then you'll be able to use all the faders to their best range.
Which is a different way of saying what we said at the outset about wanting those faders straight across just for ease of operation. You can sort of go at
It gets you there. It gets you there by
go
calibrating
from the back end forward, or from the top end backward. They both reach the same conclusion, but once again, if it starts distorting, then you need to do something up there.
You can have, if this is cranked up but this fader's down, you're going to have a very loud but distorted signal. So they really, this is a critical setting, because it's where distortion can occur, and it also can mean that, well, I have this all the way up and it's still not loud enough. It's a calibration. It really just kind of calibrates everything, and if you treat it as such so that
everything is kind of metering at the same point, then
1, 2, 1, 2. Bad things can happen if you got that tough 2 out, in other words. I'm gonna turn that right down.
And that's the I don't want to say struggle, but that's the interesting phenomenon with people that will come in and they'll do a mic check. You'll say, "Can you give me a mic check?" To go, 1, 2, 3, is this thing on? And that's it.
Right.
And then they get up there and they're really projecting really well, and it's like, okay,
Have they ever been to a rock show and heard a mic check?
yeah,
Yeah, it's it really a lot of things. Like for example, when I have someone test a mic for me at the lectern, it'll say just give me a 1, check 1, 2. Here's something to read. Read this.
right,
If you have a performer, I'd say here's some music. Sing this song. You know what I mean? Really give them a true task.
Right.
Because otherwise it's just I don't know what to say. I don't know what to sing. I don't know what
Yes.
to do. And so just here, do this.
yeah.
I've read many manuals into microphones.
Learned many skills.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give you the FCC disclaimer one more time.
Yeah.
I've read the preface to the UMC hymnals so many times.
So you stumbled on something that I was going to ask you just now. When we have that high-pitched feedback, that's coming out of your main speakers. That's not, none of that's coming out of your subwoofer.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the low end it will be always the subwoofer,
If,
so
it starts,
they can.
if it's real low, like below where the human voice is, then that would be the subwoofer.
It's really going to be more of a
Yes.
That'd be bass
The
guitar and kick
distinctive-
drum area.
yeah.
Because we did have that last week, and I think it was an unfamiliarity with the board, where it was a low rumble, and it was just getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder.
It is the kind of thing that can creep in because it's almost
Well,
it's,
and
you question yourself, am I hearing that or not?
And just if for instance, if all of your vocal mics up there, you've got 8 vocal mics, and they don't have that, what we call a high-pass filter cut
Right.
in.
The low cut.
You remember
The
this,
low
this
cut.
low cut
Yep.
right here?
Right.
If that's not cut in, then what happens is that the more microphones you have live, if they are exposed to those low-frequency sounds, that builds up a whole lot easier in low frequencies than it does in high frequencies. So you might not have that problem if you have 1 microphone on, but all of a sudden you have 8 microphones on. You have a lot more sound sort of regurgitating through the system down in the low frequencies, and that's when you get it. So that those low cut filters are very critical when you're working lots of microphones. You have the low cut filters always in place unless you specifically need the subwoofer out of that source, whatever it is. And usually with subwoofers, almost all the sources that need the subwoofer are not microphones.
Right.
Maybe except
Right.
your kick drum might be about the only
It'll
exception.
be
Unless
just
you're miking
instrumental.
a bass cabinet or something like
They've
that.
got a microphone in front of the bass guitar amp.
Yeah, right,
downstage.
Yeah,
But-
we're
but-
miking
But
the
that
bass
microphone is
line.
close enough to the guitar amp, you really don't need to have it cranked up very often.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that your problem was indeed that the low cut was not in on all your vocal microphones.
So if we start getting a low hum, can you walk through your process of thought to eliminate the feedback?
To find out where it is.
Right.
Well,
Like when you're looking at the board and everything, some people they'll be fixated. They don't know where to look.
Right.
So can you talk through? If
I
I
would
start
say-
to get feedback
Yes,
and it's
sure.
not on a channel that you've been adjusting.
Before he digs into the board, I would say more than likely something changed. You were either on the edge of feeding back the whole time, or
Yeah.
you just recently made an adjustment
Right.
that sent it into feedback or put it to the edge. So I would probably take a step back and figure out what did you just do. Now, if everything's been on the edge for a while and it just took someone dropping a book to set everything in motion, then it's a little bit more difficult. But I think Richard has something he's going to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, bear with me a second here. Let me see.
Yeah, it's always best to go back and undo what you just did.
But sometimes, like I said, it was always on the edge. Now, one thing you can do, and it's a little vague, is if you look, you probably might see a channel get pegged. You know what I mean? If everything else is quiet, this channel shouldn't have anything on it. Well, that thing is sitting there with a lot of metering on it. That's probably the culprit. Now, the flip side of that is if you got feedback happening, all your microphones hear that feedback.
Right.
They might not be contributing to it, but you'll see them all meter because they hear it just as well as your ears hear it.
Right.
So it might not be the best tool, but usually the one that's feeding back should be almost pegged because it's just getting louder and louder and louder, you know?
Okay, I'm going to.
I would say that that's probably our biggest issue is getting rid of the feedback because they're trying to hear somebody that's really soft-spoken. And they turn it up too much, but you still can't hear the person. So,
Okay, we're talking about a sound like this.
yes.
Okay, you hear that? Okay, I've created this artificially by taking one of your microphones down there in the band and engaging the EQ here and bumping the bass up. So this is not very likely to happen. And then I've just advanced the gain to where I've got it. Let's just say I had.
This has a nice tool because it actually shows you a frequency response. This shows you what the microphone is hearing, and it shows you exactly where the feedback's occurring. If you were regularly hearing feedback on a certain microphone, first of all, you should turn it down some. But if you're really trying to push it, you can try and equalize on that channel where that feedback is occurring.
But to find out where the problem is, which I think is the question that you asked. Okay, the first thing you do is you stabilize it so you don't blow the speakers or
Right.
or whatever. And it's hard to do this when you're in the middle of a service.
Right.
But let's just say that you're getting set up in rehearsal and you've got to find the feedback. Okay, so you stabilize over here, and you can start have the view pressed here so you're looking at this, and then you go through here. Well, there's something happening there. Why is there something happening there? But that's muted. That's not yet. Oh, look at that. That's the microphone that's feeding back right there. And I can go ahead and step through the rest of these and see that, well, there's something there. So which one of those is doing it? Well, let me mute that. Did it go away? It did a little bit. If I raise up the volume, still some of it there. If I mute that one, it goes away for sure. That's where the problem is. So there are tools that you can.
Heat of the moment, the thing starts squealing and going crazy, you have to decide what's worse, squealing or silence for a brief second.
Right.
I would choose silence, and you can pull it back. You can just bring it right back up slowly to the point where you know you're not there. Do a little investigation, and then you can kind of creep the master back up once you've found it. But you kind of have to triage it right away and stop it, and then do your best to smoothly kind of bring it back in.
The triage usually is to bring down your master gain enough so it disappears, but not all the way down, because then you lose everything.
Yeah.
If it's just sort of beginning, then okay, then that's just a little adjustment. If all of a sudden you've got uncontrolled feedback, then something really bad happened here. You bumped a controller or whatever, and then it's
More often than
Something
not,
that's
high frequency feedback, squealing, starts as low frequency. Not the ultra low stuff, but that just like, it'll rise from there. Usually doesn't go straight to squeal. It usually starts down. And then it's kind of like you have a little bit of reaction time to kind of sort that out.
It's usually not the vocal mics. It's usually something that's goofus in the instrument section because they've been fooling around. So I just undid all the artificial stuff I did.
Great.
But we're gonna go through here and unmute the input, the vocal inputs, and put low cuts on all the vocal microphones that we know about. You probably have some in the band area that need it also, but we don't know which ones those are. But you'll know very quickly, I suspect.
Yeah.
Anything that doesn't use the subwoofer ought to have it early. Okay, good question.
Generally speaking, with equalization, it's always better to cut than to boost. Get rid of garbage than trying to accentuate. Doesn't mean you can't, but it just does a preference. You know what I mean? You try and get rid of the muddiness rather than trying to add sparkle. But by all means,
You can
do-
tell when somebody grew up in the analog world, because that's always the way we did it in the analog world. And digital doesn't matter quite so much.
If you do a notch and you were to cut something out, you won't. Your ear isn't drawn to it. You do a notch and you boost. It's like a laser, and you can, especially if you turn it off and on, it's like whew, it's like a note. And you pull it away, you don't. It has a completely different effect. So when you do boost, often it's more you want to do a broad. It's just I want to make the whole high frequency a little bit brighter for them. So instead of doing this little bump that goes peaky, you do a broad one that might be a little more shallow, and then it won't be as obnoxious when you do
Yeah,
hear it and you
more,
bring it in.
more to the point, if you have somebody, sometimes you have pastors that don't have good speaking voices. They don't have any top end to their voice. They don't have any sibilants, and their consonants are a little bit weak. It's a really good idea to get that person in here in a quiet room where it's just somebody on the board and the pastor speaking, and over the microphone that he or she uses, and then you play around with the EQ judiciously on that microphone until that voice sounds as good as you can possibly get it, and then you nail that in place for that microphone. It's hard, a little bit harder to do it on the fly, and people are frequently disturbed if you fool with their sound while they're talking.
Absolutely.
So if you can do that in a quiet moment, quiet private moment, that's a real good thing to do.
And to be honest, when you're doing EQ like that, I find that I think I've got it right in my own mind. I have to mess it up to hear that, oh, it gets worse if I turn the frequency up. It gets worse if I turn the frequency down. This is the sweet spot. Even if I think it's there, I mess it up and then bring it back to kind of dial it in to where it needs to be. And like I said, if you're doing that in the middle of a show or a service, it's going to be disturbing not only to the performer but to the audience. So
That being said, there's also danger in those hills, because if you have somebody in control of that process who's a real lover of certain types of popular music that are all mush and no articulation, then they're very likely to set up your system the same way, and that's probably not what most of these people want to hear, me included. I'm here for the musical quality, the intelligibility, and I would suspect that the majority of the congregation is similar. Because you've got to hear the message or it doesn't mean anything, right? So. Okay.
That's all right. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.